pastor says the truth, the whole truth, says America has never been a Christian nation and never will be. Here it is.
There has never been a Christian nation. You don't live in one now. A Christian nation would never have killed and displaced 20 million Native Americans who are still left out and living in poverty. A Christian nation would never have thought that owning slaves was pleasing to God, or that it lined up with Scripture in any way, shape, or size. And we not only practiced it, but we were so obsessed with it that we went to war about it. We had a civil war. And in that civil war, 500,000 Americans died. That's more than Americans that died in World War II or any other war we've ever had. Our own Civil War, we killed 500,000 of our own people so people could have the right to own other people as property.
Preach, man of God. See, that is my brother. The reason he's my brother is because he expresses my values, okay, and seeks to protect them. That is your brother. That is your sister. Another pastor named Rob Fuqua would rebuke Christian nationalism. Here it is.
I believe the greatest threat to being one nation under God is Christian nationalism. You hear a brand of religious beliefs that believes the nation exists for the sake of a narrow group. God did not put us here so that God could favor us and bless us in a way that makes us better than other people. God put us here to be a light, to be an influence, to be a blessing to others. The Indiana Annual Conference affirms that our allegiance as Christians is first and foremost to Jesus Christ and the reign of God, not to any political party, ideology, or nation. And this conference rejects Christian nationalism as a theological distortion that confuses the mission of the church with the aims of the state. And so we encourage clergy and laity to engage in faithful religious freedom that reflects the love, justice, humility, and mercy of Christ.
Thank you, Pastor. Only one correction I will offer you. It is not a theological distortion. It is a theological perversion. Put both of them up full mass. I wanted to do this segment intentionally because I want you to be reminded that men like this still exist. White males in leadership like this are still preaching the good news of a progressive gospel based on a radical Messiah named Yahshua, who was a man of color, advocated for the poor,
Israel,
resisted the rich, criticized the political and religious corruption of his day. These men are still here. And it's just two examples to remind you, don't let the shout of others make you believe that it is the only voice in the room. You have two fine examples right in front of you.
So the Doctrine of Discovery itself is inspired by and took justification from the Papal Bulls of the late 15th century. And what was going on then was European nations, and particularly Portugal and Spain, were out there so-called discovering new lands. And the Pope interceded to try to develop a rule for how they would carve up the world amongst themselves. So the Papal Bulls that are often referred to, that set down the principle that because, and this is the concepts that were used at the time, these were civilized European nations encountering uncivilized indigenous people. This is what they said at the time. So that was the inspiration for the legal principle of the doctrine of discovery that was laid down a few centuries later. So it was adopted and imported into Canadian law that far back, again, to justify the Canadian state claiming the land of indigenous peoples. It's deeply racist. And that's one of the reasons why the doctrine has been rejected and called out all around the world. Unfortunately, though, the doctrine of discovery continues on in U.S. law and in Canadian law. In Canada particularly, I think most Canadians don't realize they engage with the doctrine on a daily basis. So when they buy and sell property, where did the interest in that property come from? They acquired that. It was a grant, a certificate of indefeasible title issued by the provincial government. Well, what gave the provincial government the legal basis to do that? All this dates back to that assertion of ownership. It does lie at the basis of Canadian law. We don't call it in Canada the doctrine of discovery, because as Canadians, we need to find a safe-sounding euphemism that would cover it up. So here in Canada, we call it the assertion of crown sovereignty. But that's a distinction without a difference. It's at the core of what the court is talking about when it refers to reconciliation. If you look at that, the court has said its reconciliation means you need to reconcile the pre-existing rights of Indigenous people in their lands with the assertion of Crown sovereignty over those lands. So basically, at least from my perspective, this is why reconciliation in Canada continues to fail, because you're trying to reconcile a right, which is that pre-existing right of Indigenous people, with a lie. And the lie is that colonizing nations can just show up, plant a flag, and acquire an interest in that land. I think if we could renounce the doctrine and get to a place where Indigenous people were respected, were recognized for their interest in the land, were recognized for their own laws, and then start there and have a conversation with, well, what do we do now going forward, instead of constantly putting Indigenous people, their laws, culture, history on trial.
The Doctrine of Discovery. Sounds a bit like a children's game, doesn't it? Maybe something you'd play in the sandbox. I discovered this shiny pebble. It's mine. Except this wasn't about pebbles. It was about entire continents. And the rule was simple. If European explorers who were Christian discovered lands inhabited by non-Christians, those lands were supposedly theirs for the taking. Lands already full of people, with their own societies, cultures, and histories. But hey, minor details when there's a flag to plant, right? This doctrine set the stage for centuries of global-scale trouble. So where did this idea come from? Cast your minds back to the 15th century. Europe's monarchs were getting restless. They had a serious craving for gold, spices, new trade routes, and most of all, land. This doctrine of discovery wasn't just stumbled upon like that shiny pebble. It was meticulously crafted, a supposedly legal and moral framework. It was essentially an excuse, a divine permission slip, for European powers to seize whatever territories they fancied. As long as the people living there weren't Christian, it was apparently open season. Imagine this scenario for a moment. You're at home, minding your own business. Suddenly, a stranger barges in, plants a flag in your living room carpet, and declares, "This house is now mine. My king says so, and my God agrees." Now, you might be wondering who exactly gave these European monarchs the green light for such audacious global land grabbing. Well, a significant part of the answer is the Pope. Yes, the actual Pope, head of the Catholic Church. The Vatican issued a series of decrees known as Papal Bulls. Think of these as official, top-level, divinely blessed permission slips. Permission for what, you ask? Oh, just for invading, conquering, and subjugating non-Christian nations. All done in God's name, apparently. Let's name some names, shall we? Because this isn't ancient, unknowable history. Take the Papal Bull Romanus Pontifex, issued in 1455. This little gem essentially gave King Afonso V of Portugal the go-ahead. It authorized him to invade, capture, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever. And it didn't stop there. It also explicitly permitted the enslavement of these populations. The Pope said it was okay, so it must have been perfectly fine. To make seizing continents already populated by millions seem less like blatant theft, colonizing powers popularized the concept of terra nullius. It translates to nobody's land or empty land, a nasty shock to the millions of indigenous people living there. They defined occupation in European terms. Indigenous systems were ignored or dismissed. This dehumanization justified violence and immense suffering. Terra nullius became the ultimate legal trick for colonial expansion. Section 4, Consequences, a polite word for centuries of suffering. So, what were the actual on-the-ground consequences of this doctrine of discovery and its partner in crime, terra nullius? For indigenous peoples around the globe, the results were, to put it mildly, an unmitigated catastrophe. We are talking about land dispossession on a staggering scale. Entire nations were forcibly removed from their ancestral homelands, the lands that had sustained them for generations, lands that were intrinsically linked to their cultures, spiritual beliefs, and identities. This wasn't a gentle relocation program. It was often accompanied by extreme violence, broken treaties, and relentless pressure. It was theft, pure and simple, on an unimaginable scale. And the devastation didn't stop at land theft. The doctrine of discovery paved the way for systematic cultural destruction. Indigenous languages, rich with unique ways of understanding the world, were suppressed often brutally. Spiritual practices and ceremonies, central to indigenous life, were outlawed and condemned as pagan or savage. Children were forcibly taken from their families and communities and sent to residential or boarding schools. These institutions often had the explicit aim of killing the Indian in him, and saving the man, a chillingly honest admission of their goal, to eradicate indigenous cultures and assimilate them into the dominant colonial society. The cruelty was not accidental, it was design. Furthermore, let's be absolutely clear. The doctrine of discovery and the papal bulls that underpinned it also provided a direct justification for the transatlantic slave trade. Remember Romanus Pontifex? It didn't just authorize the seizure of lands from non-Christians, it explicitly sanctioned their enslavement. Section 5, still haunting us, the doctrine's zombie-like persistence. This doctrine of discovery isn't some dusty, irrelevant historical footnote. It's more like a legal zombie, casting a long, dark shadow over legal systems today. Thankfully, indigenous activists have been fighting back for centuries. And recently, the Vatican formally repudiated the doctrine in March 2023.